ada suara.
No sound, yeah?
There's no sound, Dr. Gita.
Imagine having the power to impact our future, tackling major issues we face today: political coup, climate change, the fight against a global pandemic. In the midst of it all, will you watch from the sidelines, or will you take the lead? Do you have the passion, the perseverance, and a strong sense of critical thinking? Taylor's University offers Southeast Asia's first work-based learning international relations degree, where in your third year, you will work, learn, and be mentored by game changers in the industry. Diplomats, foreign officials, leaders from international organizations, and top scholars coming together as part of this hands-on, industry-based education, led by Malaysia's most influential, trailblazing leaders. The world is in need of visionary leaders now more than ever. Social leaders who will pioneer change. Be the next global leader now.
Do you want to be an agent of social change, tackling issues like poverty, inequality, mental health, to be remembered as the protector of the most vulnerable? Fulfill your calling to be a prominent advocate, or simply work behind the scenes, as long as you are creating a better future for generations to come. To deal with the root causes of society's problem, you must first prepare yourself. We can help you get there. As the #1 private university in Malaysia, Taylor's University is offering Asia's pioneering degree in social innovation and change. Get involved. Spark your leadership instincts with the Emerging Leaders Greenhouse program, where you can shadow and learn from prominent national leaders, both on and off campus. Learn how we partner with leading social organizations to drive change in the society. Great leaders set out to make a difference. Lead the change you want to see in the world.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, students, ladies and gentlemen, a very good evening to all and welcome to the 6th session of Malaysian Politics and Public Issues series of talks, or what we have fondly come to refer to as the MPPI talks, which is a joint initiative of Unity and Harmony Mediators Movement and Taylor's School of Liberal Arts and Sciences, Bachelor of Social Science. My name is Anindita Dasgupta, and I'm Associate Professor in Political Science and the Head of School of the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Taylor's University, Malaysia. Now, ladies and gentlemen, this fortnightly series, the MPPI talk, was launched on 27th May this year by Emeritus Professor Dr. Shad Salim Faruqi, who delivered the inaugural talk on the making of the Malaysian Constitution. The next talk of the series was delivered by none other than Dr. Chandra Muzaffar, President of International Movement for a Just World, and his talk was titled The Making of the Rukun Negara. Subsequently, on 24th of June, Prof. Shad Salim Faruqi delivered another thought-provoking talk on understanding the Malaysian Constitution. Excuse me. On 8th June, again, Dr. Chandra Muzaffar delivered his second much-anticipated talk titled Rukun Negara as the Nation's Compass. The next fortnight, on the 22nd of July, Prof. Shad spoke on Islam and the Malaysian Constitution. And I trust many of you were here on most, if not on all occasions. And today, we are absolutely delighted to welcome Dr. Chandra Muzaffar back among us to deliver his much awaited, much anticipated, and the 6th MPPI talk on the which is titled The Integration of Sabah, Sarawak, and the Semenanjung. So ladies and gentlemen, in the recent weeks and months, we've been seeing turbulence in this world, especially the growing numbers of cases of COVID infections worldwide. The last year hasn't been easy for anyone, and it seems that the dust may not settle for a while yet in different parts of the world. So this coronavirus is testing the very strength of our social fabric and has atomized us within our own individual and lonely spaces due to the very vicious nature of the health crisis. And you may say that social life is being held in a state of suspension. And at unprecedented times like this, the values that bind us together can be a guiding light or a North Star in order to carry us into the future. So I remember one of the MPPI talks of our own unique histories as nations, and had spoken of the dilemma of democracies. Today, in Dr. Chandra Muzaffar's talk, we look forward to gain insights on how democracies and peoples interact within the broad framework of a federation. And as we stumble through an era of what some have termed as post-truth, and the erudite voices of thought leaders such as Dr. Chandra Muzaffar gain even greater relevance, especially to our youth who are the harbingers and leaders of the future. And in order to produce the transformation leaders of tomorrow, you would have just seen in a series of videos which were played just now, the School of Liberal Arts and Sciences at Taylor's University has recently launched 2 new degrees in social sciences, one with the specialization in international relations, and the other offers Asia's first specialization in social innovation and change. And in the videos that you saw, you'd have seen Ms. Tina Jamaluddin and of course none other than our own Anas Zubedy share their thoughts on the new degree. So at Taylor's, we believe that many of the next generation of Malaysian leaders will emerge from our social science programs, and where students will be exposed to great thinkers who will undoubtedly be the source of many new questions in young and fertile minds. And for those who are joining us for the first time today, I'm very happy to share that one of the flagship modules in the program, titled Malaysian Politics and Public Issues, and yes, that's from there, the name of the MPPI talks is derived from there, will be led by Anas Zubedy himself. And these lectures will be recorded and used as text or learning resources for our students who as future leaders need to learn about the nation's journey in order to impact its future. So I'm very happy to introduce 2 of my colleagues who have been supporting Anas in this module and will co-teach with him. So that's Ms. Noainif Omar, who is the module leader, and Ms. Fadila Raihan Lokman, who's the co-instructor of the module. So Noainif, would you like to share a few words to introduce the module, Malaysian Politics and Public Issues? What are we to expect from this module, Ainif?
All right. Thank you, Associate Professor Dr. Anindita Dasgupta. So basically, the Malaysian politics and public issues, this course serve as the introduction to political science. Malaysian governments and issues revolving Malaysian politics and government, and the course also surveys the theoretical and practical dimension of politics in Malaysian government. It also discusses issues in Malaysian politics and government and how public is. We will also emphasize not just only see how issue affects the public, but also how the public affects them. To range from government spending, civil rights, poverty, education, urban problems, crime, violence, defense policy, environment, and also foreign policy. What the course is all about. Back to you.
Thanks. Yeah, thanks, Ms. Noainif Omar. I'm sure your background in international relations and just your work in the area of diplomacy is going to be really helpful while you teach this course. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And Ms. Fadila Raihan Lokman, proud alumna of Taylor's itself. How will these MPPI talks be used as learning resources for social science students? Would you like to share?
Hello everyone. Thank you for joining a little bit about this webinar series. As mentioned earlier by Dr. Anita, this webinar is derived from the name of the module itself, Politics and Public Issues in Malaysia. So what we will do is that we will turn these webinars into students' learning materials. So as per outlined in our syllabus, so every week, students will learn about different politics and public issues. So this series of webinars are intended to address these various issues all together and allow the students to hear directly from the experts. So we are hoping that this will bring greater understanding of the topics, and students will be able to have a more meaningful conversation in the classroom later on. So that is all from me. Back to Dr. Anita.
Thank you, Ms. Fadila. Thank you so much. I think it's very exciting. It's an exciting way of learning and teaching this program, as Ana Zubedy, Ainif, and you will be walking the students through this course. And thank you so much. And ladies and gentlemen, now allow me to introduce Mr. Ana Zubedy. Of course, most of you know him, who is the moderator of the MPPI talks. So Anas Zubedy is the managing director of Zubedy M. Sendirian Berhad, a training company that focuses on soft skills and making people more productive. Unity extensively for the last 3 decades. Anas is a senior fellow of Human Resources Development Corporation. Anas is an adjunct professor at Taylor School of Liberal Arts and Sciences and director of social innovation and change at the Bachelor of Social Science, Taylor's University. Thank you once again, ladies and gentlemen, and Anas, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Anin. Good evening, salam sejahtera to everyone. Let me share the screen. Let's welcome Dr. Chandra. Today we are lucky to have Dr. Chandra to share with us his knowledge on integration of Sabah, Sarawak, and Semenanjung. Let me just mention politics and public issues series. The goal is to provide basic foundation framework by experts, talks, and also create a platform for dialogue, discourses, and debates via public forums. I believe many of us are very familiar with what's happening in the social media. In social media, it's no holds barred, no rules. But sometimes we wonder, are we getting the right information? Are we getting a well thought out information? So we decided with these kind of chats and talks, bringing people like Dr. Chandra, we can listen to an expert point of view. The series of talks and forums will cover key topics like Malaysian Constitution, socio-political history, public policies, and specific topics like education, national culture, general election, integration, economics. The idea is to cover the wide area. How do we introduce to Malaysian the framework and understanding of Malaysian politics and issues in Malaysian politics, so that if you follow our talks from the next, maybe from the start and probably in the next 1 year, be able to have a big picture. And how do you look at a framework? When there's an issue pops out in Malaysian politics, like what's happening today, you have a framework of reference, which is solid foundation. Now, ultimately, we want to educate, discuss, and promote the exchange of ideas about Malaysian politics and public issues, of course, in a mature, rational, and very justly balanced way. And as my colleagues have suggested just now, if you were a young person, who wants to join us in this program as an undergraduate in Taylor's, you'll be able to get all this picture in our program, our coursework, and at the same time, you'll be able to one day, if you ever decide to go into politics, you'll be a very knowing politician who is mature, rational, and justly balanced. Inshallah, God willing. Now, today we'll be on the 6th series, and we have 2 more to complete this 8, and then we will showcase with you the next 8, maybe, on the 2nd September. Now, let me say a little bit about Dr. Chandra. Dr. Chandra Muzaffar is the president of the International Movement for a Just World. Short, we call it acronym of JUST, an international NGO based in Malaysia, which seeks to critique global injustice and to develop an alternative vision of a just and compassionate civilization, guided by universal spiritual and moral values. He has published extensively on civilizational dialogue, international politics, religion, human rights, and the Malaysian society. Dr. Chandra is the author and editor of 32 books in English and Malay. Many of his writings have been translated into other languages. Among Dr. Chandra's latest publications are A World in Crisis, Is There a Cure? And Reflections on Malaysian Unity and Other Challenges. In 1977, he founded a multi-ethnic social reform group called Aliran Kesedaran Negara, Aliran, which he held for 14 years. Today, apart from his role in JUST, Dr. Chandra sits on the board of a number of international NGOs concerned with social justice and civilizational dialogue. Dr. Chandra was professor and director of the Center of Civilizational Dialogue, University of Malaya, from 1997 to 1999, and professor of global studies at University of Science in Malaysia, 2007-2012. Dr. Chandra travels abroad frequently, giving lectures and speaking at seminars and conferences. He's also a regular speaker at meetings at home in Malaysia. Dr. Chandra is a recipient of a number of international awards related to his scholarship and social activism. Dr. Chandra is married to Mariam Muhammad Hashim, and they have 2 daughters, 2 granddaughters, and 5 grandsons. And without much ado, let's pass the floor to Dr. Chandra to help us understand and give his view on the integration of Sabah.
Will be able to continue to contribute in one which I would address this evening. It's about the challenges facing a federation like ours that is seeking to integrate different communities, different territories, because territorial integration is essential to the whole question of national integration. And we would like to reflect a little on how we can grapple with some of the challenges that confront us. Let me begin this talk by saying that if integration of multi-ethnic, multicultural, multi-religious nations is a very big challenge. In Malaysia, and in the context of integration of Sabah and Sarawak with Semenanjung, the challenges are perhaps even more complex. Why do I say this? Just reflect on this. There are 3 dimensions of integration that make our situation more complex than what you would find in many other places. What are the 3 dimensions of integration? One is geography. it's a challenge in other countries too, but in Malaysia, it is a unique challenge. Integration from the geographical perspective, because Sabah and Sarawak, they're separated from Semenanjung. And that complicates integration. Separated by the South China Sea, separated by a part of the Pacific Ocean. And it's formidable, this barrier. Just to give you an idea of how significant a barrier like this is, there was a country which was separated by a land mass, more than 1,000 kilometers of land that separated East Pakistan from West Pakistan. They were both part of the national entity called Pakistan in 1947. But the strains were so great that by the beginning of the 1970s, 71, Pakistan could not hold together. And in December, the two parts of Pakistan were separated, became two different countries. That's a nation separated by a land mass. Here we are talking of a nation separated by a mass of water. And I think we would all agree that crossing a mass of water is more difficult than crossing a land mass, which tells you how formidable the challenge of integration is. So that's one, the geographical dimension. Number two, we have a demographic dimension that makes it very complicated. In a multi-ethnic, multi-religious society, if you have people of the same community scattered over different parts of that federation, it's a big challenge, but not as great a challenge if in some parts of the federation you have people of a particular community who are exclusive to that part of the country. You know this. If you reflect a little bit about the population composition of Sabah and Sarawak, the Kadazans are from Sabah, and other communities related to the Kadazans, exclusive, exclusive. You may find them in Johor, in other parts of the country, but in terms of origin, history, evolution, they belong to Sabah. And then you have the Ibans. The Ibans belong to Sarawak. So Sabah has got the Kadazans. We have the Ibans in Sarawak. The Ibans may be found in small numbers in other parts of Malaysia, especially now. But as a community, they belong to Sarawak, just as the Kadazans belong to Sabah. And that's what enhances the challenge of integration. In other words, communities that are exclusive to certain geographical parts of the country. The third dimension, which makes the situation complex, it's the historical dimension. When federations are created, when territories come together to form a nation, most of the time there is a certain dimension of history that they share. In other words, they have some elements of a shared history. In the case of Sabah and Sarawak and Semenanjung, Peninsula Malaysia, that shared dimension is not really part of the evolution, the indigenous evolution of our land. The shared dimension that is most prominent is linked to British colonialism. All three, what is the factor that they have in common? They are all colonized by Britain. And if you dig a little deeper, even in terms of British colonialism, they're different. In the case of Peninsula Malaysia, the British were the last of the Western colonizers, and they were here for quite a while. But it was Britain, the empire, that colonized Peninsula Malaysia. But Sabah was colonized by a trading company, the East India Company. In the case of Sabah, British, but it was a trading company. It was not a political entity in that sense, in the real sense of the term. It was a trading company. While in the case of Sarawak, for most of its colonial history, it was colonized by a family, the Brookes. The Brookes were the colonizers, British, yes, but they were the colonizers of Sarawak. So even in terms of British colonialism, there is this difference, which I think is interesting, because they produced different forms of governance. And the different forms of governance impacted upon the different components of Malaysia, Peninsula Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak in different ways. So keep that in mind as our backdrop. Three fundamental characteristics related to geography, demography, and history. Now, having said that, let me now very quickly provide you a little bit of backdrop in relation to after the Second World War that led eventually to the formation of Malaysia. Immediately after the Second World War, in the case of Semenanjung, it was a federation created by the British. It had its origins, as I think Malaysians would be very familiar with this. It had its origins in the federated Malay states, the unfederated Malay states, and the Strait settlements. They were integrated into the Federation of Malaya in 1948. That was immediately after the Second World War. And if you look at the most important political activity in the years after the Second World War, it was basically, one, the quest for Merdeka, and two, the question of how to integrate, in a sense, yes, integrate, how to incorporate the non-indigenous, largely Chinese and Indian components of the nation that was being formed. So these were the two major developments between 1945, the end of the Second World War, and 1957. In the case of Semenanjung. In the case of Sabah, the East India Company was still there, and there was some interest in politics, but not very much. It was only after Tunku Abdul Rahman, the first Prime Minister of Malaya, later Malaysia, it is only after Tunku Abdul Rahman announced the idea of Malaysia the idea of a new nation called Malaysia, a nation that emerged from the integration of, at that time, Malaya, Singapore, Sabah, Sarawak, and Brunei. That was the original idea, as many of you know. But it didn't happen that way. The Tunku announces on the 27th of May, 1961. And then political activities began in Sabah. Same thing in Sarawak. More political activities began at that time, though Sarawak was a bit different from Sabah, because they had active political party even before 1961. And this is the Sarawak United People's Party, SUPP, which was inclined towards left-wing politics and had some link with the Malaysian Communist Party. That was the Sarawak United People's Party. But apart from that party, there was no other major party. So both Sabah and Sarawak, not that effervescent when it came to politics until the announcement about the creation of Malaysia. Now that's the background that one has to understand. And now we would look at Malaysia. Not the formation of Malaysia, which is a very rich subject in itself. We will not go into that. We'll just look at Malaysia, basically two perspectives. One, we will look at Malaysia in terms of the bonds which hold us together, in spite of all the challenges we face, meaning by which the bonds that hold Sabah, Sarawak, and Semenanjung together. So that would be one component. And then I'll look at the challenges that we face, which is important in a very objective manner to the second component, and then draw some conclusions from that, which we could use as the basis for our discussion. So if you look at the bonds that hold us together, in spite of everything, we have a common territory. That's an important bond. And that territory is still there intact, except for two episodes. One, Brunei did not join the Federation. Many people thought it was going to, but for various reasons that need not detain us at this stage, Brunei did not join. The nation that was being formed. The other episode, of course, is what happened in 1965, the separation of Singapore from the rest of Malaysia. That was the first major blow to the Federation, the separation of Singapore, 1965, 9th of August, 1965. Now, apart from that, the Federation is held together in spite of various challenges and so on. And I would say that that ability to keep the Federation together, that's an achievement, because it has not happened that easily in so many other different parts of the world. Central African Federation, the West Indies, they've all fallen apart. I mentioned these two in particular because the British were behind this idea. Just as if you look at Malaysia, and if you asked what was the main driving force behind the formation of Malaysia, of course, the man who articulated that idea was Tunku Abdul Rahman. But the ones who were very keen on the formation of Malaysia, they were the British. It was a British idea, actually. Now that we've been around for a number of years, we can say this openly. It was a British idea. The British wanted a federation in this part of the world which would safeguard British interests. So whatever one may say, dear old Sukarno was right when he criticized the formation of Malaysia, and he said this is to preserve and perpetuate British interests in this part of the world, which is why as soon as Malaysia was formed, they launched the Konfrontasi agenda of theirs. They were against the formation of Malaysia. Before it was a reality, and after it became a reality, they continued to oppose the formation of Malaysia for perhaps for a good part of about 2 or 3 years. Because they said it was an attempt to perpetuate neo-colonialism in this part of the world, British interests. And if I may repeat, they were not completely off tangent. Except for 2 interesting developments that took place as a counter to this argument that it was a mere neo-colonial project. Yes, the British wanted it, but the people were consulted. There was a referendum that was conducted under the supervision of the United Nations, and the majority of those who participated in that referendum supported the idea of Malaysia. And there was also a fact-finding mission. They looked at this idea. It was called the Cobalt Commission. And that fact-finding mission also endorsed the idea of Malaysia. So it was not as if it was an idea imposed upon the people of these territories by the British. That would not be correct. It was an idea that was supported by the people. The people wanted this sort of federation. And in the end, it became a reality on the 16th of September, 1963. This again, it's interesting as an aside that the date itself was something which was not really pre-planned. The Tunku and in fact, some of the others, including leaders from Singapore, Sabah, and Sarawak, they're hoping to launch Malaysia on the 31st of August, 31st of August, which is Malaya's birthday. It would make it much easier, you know. You don't have to cut the cake 2 or 3 times. You just, you know, have one birthday on the 31st of August. But it could not happen because of Indonesia's Konfrontasi. They refused to recognize, and the Tunku, being the Tunku, he said, never mind, if they don't want the 31st of August, they need a bit more time to consider this idea of Malaysia, we will postpone formation of Malaysia for a while. So that's why in the end, it was formed on the 16th of September, not on the 31st of August. In fact, Sarawak and Sabah, and Sarawak especially, had attained independence on the 23rd of July. And so there was quite a bit of confusion at that time. Eventually, of course, 16th September became the date for the formation of Malaysia. Right. And in essence, it was a federation that had many of the features of the old Malaya. The name was an extension of Malaya to start with. The flag, it just added, you know, stripes and stars. And if you look at the national anthem, it was the Negara Ku, there's no change. It's in many ways an extension and elaboration of Malaya. But having said that, let me also emphasize, and this is very important, given what has happened since, for the leaders of Sabah and Sarawak, and also Singapore at that time, the 2 years that Singapore was part of the federation, for them it was not just an extension of Malaya. They saw it as a new nation in a sense, a new nation because it was made up of 4 entities. The entities had come together by mutual agreement. Semenanjung, Sabah, Sarawak, Singapore. And they held on to that idea. And that idea is contained, of course, in the Malaysia Agreement, 1963. It is 4 entities that have come together. In other words, it was not Malaya expanding to incorporate the others. 4 entities, independent, yet come together. And to this day, you find that leaders of Sabah and Sarawak are very sensitive about it. And this is part of the confusion. First of the major challenges, which we'll talk about later, talk about the challenges that the Federation faces. It is perhaps the most significant. What is this nation? What is this nation? How does it express its identity? It's a major challenge. We'll come to that in a short. So in terms of the strengths, in terms of the bonds that hold us together, territory is still valid, in spite of that separation of Singapore. We can argue that the basic structure of government is still there. Parliamentary democracy, constitutional monarchy, even though some at Sarawak don't have monarchs, but neither does Penang have a monarch, Malacca does not have a monarch. So they fit into that pattern. Parliamentary democracy, constitutional monarchy, and at the same time, you'll find that the economy is a mixed economy, as it has been from the beginning, more so in the 70s, and 80s, and so on. So that has remained a feature of our economy. Free market and public enterprises at the same time. One can put it in more concrete terms. And in terms of the culture, acceptance of cultural diversity, this has been a feature of Malaysia right from the beginning. And the attributes that go with that acceptance of diversity, accommodation, which can be described as a willingness to embrace the other, it's there, one of our great strengths. And the acceptance that in the process of embracing the other, identity which embraces everyone will have to emerge in the long run. So these are the attributes of the nation state. They've remained more or less intact. If anything, again, important point to keep in mind, the incorporation of Sabah and Sarawak strengthened the multi-ethnic, multi-religious character of the nation, made it even more meaningful, Sabah and Sarawak. And we can argue that over the decades, since 1963, there are many events that we share. There are many personalities that we share that adds on to our bonding. Personalities who are recognized as part and parcel of Malaysia. I suppose if our diver had done well, she would have become a national icon par excellence. But it didn't happen. But maybe next Olympics, she would do well. But there are many examples of this sort. Right from the outset, this is amazing. Temenggung Juga, the leader of the Evans in Sarawak, his distinctive attire, his hairstyle, his very broad attitude towards integration, assimilation, and so on. All these things, I think, endeared him to a lot of places. And there were other personalities of that sort. So there were events, there were personalities, political controversies, the Bakung Dam, Batang Ai, all those things which somehow created a sense of oneness. One could add to all this, one may, that both Sabah and Sarawak had evolved a form of the national language through their own efforts, which made those states unique. A lot of Sabahans, as many of you know, speak Malay very fluently, but with sort of Sabah dimension to it. And this is also true of the Sarawakans. They call it Bahasa Sarawak, which is actually Bahasa Melayu. But on the other hand, It is unique to Sarawak. And that creates that bond with Semenanjung. Yes. So there are common bonds of this, in spite of everything. And one can argue that through our very presence in the international sphere, regional politics, as a nation, we've also strengthened our common bonds. That has helped. Now, having said that, let me now look at some of the challenges that we face. The first I had alluded to is linked to the formation of Malaysia itself, unique type of federation, and there were boundary tensions because of the way it was formed. Sabah and Sarawak were guaranteed rights, unique features which had been preserved, the most important of which was over migration. They would control their own migration and the labor laws that went with migration. They would not be dictated to by Semenanjung. So that was one area where they would have control, and there were grants which were unique to Sabah and Sarawak that other states didn't have. And certainly a degree of autonomy compared to the other states in the federation. And that degree of autonomy gave them that unique stature within the federation. But because I referred to this point a little earlier, what creating a federation out of 4 entities meant was never clarified. It was never clarified. For Sabah and Sarawak and Singapore, and maybe even some people in the peninsula, these were 4 entities that had come together. And they saw that as their strength. But because it was not defined in terms of structures, because it was not defined in terms of powers, rights, it wasn't. It became contentious. At different points, it led to controversies here and there. So much so that our third Prime Minister, Tun Hussein Awang, felt that there was a need to standardize the relationship between the center and the states. So a major amendment was made to the Constitution in 1976, which was supported by Sabah and Sarawak. Singapore was no longer part of the federation at that time. And what was that amendment? That amendment spelled out clearly that all the component states were equal states within the federation. In other words, it said in the first article, if I'm not mistaken, that Malaysia is made up of A, B, C, D, E, F, and so on, all the states. No recognition of the separate status of Sabah and Sarawak as entities themselves who would be on the same level as Semenanjung. But here what we were saying was that these states, Sabah and Sarawak, were on the same level as the individual states of the federation. So this is a change in nomenclature, in conception, but it had very serious implications. The MPs from Sabah and Sarawak voted for it unanimously, thinking that it didn't mean very much. They still had their grants, they still had their autonomy, they still had control over migration and all the rest of it. But in recent years, it has come to the fore again. And there was this attempt to perhaps rectify the situation, to maybe go back to what it was in 1963. This was after Pakatan Harapan came to power in 2018. But as you know, it was not passed by the Malaysian Parliament, mainly because I think there was quite a bit of confusion on what this really meant. Now, it'll be very difficult to change that, actually, if you ask me, because it would require major changes in terms of the relationship between Putrajaya and Sabah and Sarawak. And it will have implications for the other states too. So perhaps the present attitude is to let sleeping dogs lie, not to touch this issue. And what they want to do, and I'll come to this at the end of my presentation, what they want to do now is perhaps strengthen autonomy without necessarily changing the nomenclature, strengthen the autonomy of Sabah and Sarawak within the Federation. We will have a peek at that later. So in terms of the great challenges that we face, this is the first and most important, which has given rise to a lot of controversy. What is their real status in the Federation? And related to that is the second challenge, what are their powers? Because the powers, some are very clear, like migration. But what about other areas? Both argue, and perhaps rightly, that if you recognize autonomy and their rights in areas, on matters such as education, they should have greater say. In matters such as health, which in a sense is provided for in the Constitution, because health is one of those areas which comes under the concurrent list. In other words, in both the state and the center, they have some powers over the management of health, public health. So they say we should have much greater say. And again, you see, when you are confronted with real situations, issues like this come to the fore. COVID. The question of, how much Sarawak can do on its own, whether it can order vaccines, whether it can organize its own quarantine program, and all the rest of it. These are not unusual issues in the Federation, but we haven't really thought through these issues. This is our problem. We haven't really reflected on them in depth, which is what we should have done. So there are issues of that sort that deal with the actual mechanics of power, and not just education and health, even infrastructure, how much powers the state should have, and that is related to finance, how much control they should have over their own internal state expenditure. And these are issues that are being discussed apparently, and have been discussed for many years now. One hopes that we'll be able to resolve some of these challenges, which again, we will provide some thoughts on this thorny subject at the end of the lecture. So if you look at the problems, the nature of our federation, the powers that the center exercises, and powers related to the states, specific expressions of this from time to time, like the health crisis we're facing now, it has come to the fore to some extent here. And we're also faced with other challenges. The center would like to have greater say. It already has a lot of say over appointments, including appointments of state officials, public officials. In fact, this is an area that the states have complained about, especially Sabah and Sarawak, that they don't have much say over the appointment of senior bureaucrats within the state, and also the right to make policies connected with those spheres. There are also some very sensitive issues, and I want to touch on two of them. As far as center-state relations go. One is the question of religion. Officially, Islam is not the official religion of both the states, as all of you know. If you look at the Constitution in 1963, it is the religion of the Federation, but in Sabah and Sarawak, Islam doesn't have that role. And any attempt to promote Islam by a state apparatus in those two states would be seen as transgressing or diverting from the intended purpose of the state constitutions. And this has resulted in some controversy because Sabah, under Tun Haji Mustafa Harun, was quite keen on proselytizing. It set up a separate outfit for this purpose because it couldn't do it through the state apparatus. But nonetheless, because the power of the state was indirectly associated with proselytization, quite a lot of people were unhappy with what was happening. And especially the non-Muslims, who collectively were the majority in Sabah. In Sarawak, it does not happen that way. In fact, under its chief minister for a very, very long while, which was Sarawak became the only state in the Federation that was actively involved in promoting interfaith dialogue. Actively promoting interfaith dialogue. And they went on for quite a long while, and it continued under the late Tan Sri Adnan Satin. I'm not sure of the situation now, whether it still continues that way, but there is a commitment to interfaith dialogue, and present Chief Minister Tan Sri Johari is as committed to principles of this sort as its predecessors. Which is why in many ways Sarawak is a model state when it comes to interreligious interaction and harmony. No one particular religious community is an absolute majority, and relations at the level of ordinary people tend to be very harmonious. In any case, back to the critical point about religion. So this whole question of how religion is handled by the state, whether there's pressure from the center, whether the center wants the state to abide by certain rules, informal rules that we have. These are issues which give rise to a certain degree of friction. They've not really been resolved, and sometimes it depends upon the head of a particular state, like the Chief Minister of Sarawak today and in the past. They have handled it quite well. Now, apart from this aspect of religion, there's another dimension to religion which has also created some uneasiness, especially in relation to Sabah. In the mid-70s, partly because of the war that is going on in the southern part of the Philippines, quite a lot of Filipinos, Filipino Muslims migrated to Sabah. And partly because they were migrants who were in a desperate situation, the federal government, together with the state government, in Sabah during that period, they offered a certain degree of protection to these refugees. And the numbers grew, it swelled, and after a while they became permanent residents, permanent citizens, and the local population, the local Kadazan population, which is largely Christian, or was at that time, now it's more mixed, they began to sort of feel uneasy. And that gave rise to some tensions. The issue of ICs came to the fore because of the dual citizenship. The locals felt that it was not fair to their own situation, their own position. And rightly so, they reacted to it at that time. It remains an unresolved issue. This question of ICs, Sabah, citizenship, the multi-religious population, and so on. So both these interrelated issues, migration, demographics on the one hand, and the question of state-center relations vis-a-vis religion, they will remain there for some time to come, especially in the context of Sabah. And a lot depends on how these issues will be negotiated. And that brings me to the conclusion. I think the federal government and the state government, this is an earlier period, they did the right thing by setting up a committee to study these issues in depth, to make recommendations as part of the larger question of center-state relations. I say it was the wise thing to do because if you look at the fate of other federations, when you ignore issues like this, you allow them to become big problems, or you just sweep them under the carpet, you will find that sooner or later it will explode. So we did the right thing by setting up a committee made up of people from both the states and the center to look at this issue. And even though there's been a change of government, the committee is still there, but I don't know how much work it has done, to be honest with you. Partly because we are overwhelmed with so many other challenges. But the committee is there, looking at this contentious issue of relations with the center and the states. And at the same time, even on the IC issue, though a report had been made public a few years ago, you find that there is still quite a bit of unhappiness, and they continue to talk about this issue, though here again, I don't know how much real work has been done. I wanted to flag these two issues among other issues so that we would know that while our federation has done fairly well, we've been able to hold together in very difficult circumstances, there are also challenges. And these are serious challenges, and we will be making a very big mistake if not in the sense that we sort of feel sometimes, as we do, when it comes to other issues, we feel that these issues will go away if we ignore them. They're not going to go away, and I think we'll have to address these issues in a mature manner. I would say in conclusion that given the difficulties that confront us as a federation, the complexities that we have to grapple with, we have done very well. But the question of federation, of rights, responsibilities, of powers, and privileges that pertain to states or the center at certain times, these are issues that have to be addressed, which is why we need a mechanism for things like this. And I don't think political parties provide the right mechanism. Because whenever an issue becomes political, it becomes contentious. And people take positions, they choose to posture, and that becomes very difficult. Issues like this, you have to discuss, explore them in depth, come up with solutions behind closed doors, and then perhaps communicate with society at large. We haven't developed mechanisms of that sort. And these are things that we have to do in the future. And I hope that new generation and young people, it's at tailors, other places, they would be able to focus on these issues in a rational and objective manner. A lot will depend on how we handle these issues. Just bear in mind that historically speaking, not many federations, especially those which appear that what I talked about in the earlier part of this lecture, artificial in terms of the absence of demographic pattern, the absence of geographical factors, historical factors, federations that appear to be artificial to some extent, they've struggled to survive. They've struggled to survive. And we have to ensure that we survive and we succeed, if only because we should be an example to other people when it comes to living together in a multi-ethnic society. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Chandra. Thank you, Dr. Chandra, for being able to explain such a large topic in an organized, simple way within just about 45 minutes. Yeah, so I mean, we all know that this topic is larger than 45 minutes. We should have at least 45 hours. But maybe, for every point that you have given, we can spend an hour talking about it. Yeah, so, but what I'll do now is there are questions which also still related to some of the explanation you have given. Maybe we can take this chance to go into a little bit more detail. The questions, of course, hovers around similar topics. Yeah, you can see. So it shows this is the concern area. These are issues that we must not sweep underneath the carpet. Yeah, we need to really deal with them. So I'll share the screen and go question page by page. Yeah? As usual, when there are questions which are almost within the same ambit, I'll put them in one page. So the first one, the first three questions, which is relating to obviously about the center and state powers. Yeah. The first question is from Sarah Aisha. What are the chances that Federal will honor the earlier agreement? Okay, we have to talk, what do we mean by earlier agreement? How can Sabah and Sarawak exercise their rights? Shall I go through all three questions first, Chandra? Yeah?
Yeah, okay.
Okay. By Zila, it says here, an integrated and united Malaysia can only be achieved if MA 63 is well respected and fulfilled. That is the wishes of most, if not all, East Malaysians, or Sabahan and Sarawakians, I think it's better to use. Unfortunately, matters of the agreement are still being discussed. Why is it so hard to grant the wishes in its entirety? And thirdly, Kamaruddin Ahmad, the 20 points agreement become political polemic, an obstacle to integrate Sabah, Sarawak, and Semenanjung. How to overcome this issue? So this is, I think, the general language that we hear in society about the what you call it, the center and state relationship between KL and Sabah, Sarawak.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah.
Thank you, Nas. I'll take all the three questions together.
Yes. Yeah.
Because the thrust is
almost the same.
The direction. Yeah. Well, I don't think one should blame any one party. It's a very complex issue. I can understand, for instance, why the center may want to continue to keep a grip on certain aspects of center-state relations. Because if they decide to decentralized totally, they also have to think of the other states in the federation. You take this case in point, Western Oil. Maybe the agreement that Sarawak has worked out with Petronas, maybe that is the sort of framework they can use for the question of resources generally. In the case of Sabah and Sarawak, and maybe even other states, Terengganu would be very keen on this, yeah, and other states. What was missing, I think, in some of the earlier attempts, there wasn't this recognition that the state, because it was a natural resource within their jurisdiction, in a sense, they wanted to know for certain. They wanted it to be translated into something tangible. They wanted to know for certain that they could exercise a certain degree of authority in terms of not just the revenue, but management, and in terms of future planning, because especially resources, natural resources like oil and so on, future planning is a very important factor. And once you recognize those things, I think it will be quite okay. You may be able to work out some agreement. I mean, you can't, for instance, look for a mathematically sound interpretation of what you want. What is the percentage that is cited very often by Sabah and Sarawak? That's the percentage that you want. It may not be possible. But if you look at the way in which development assistance is spread out, and if you look at the degree of control that is given to the states and their role, then maybe you'll be able to meet the parties concerned halfway. These are contentious issues anywhere in the world. It's not just in Malaysia, but I think they can be resolved. And I was somewhat encouraged by the recent Sarawak agreement, though it covers certain aspects. But still, I think it is something that we should think of. But the essence of one's argument is this, that one should go on talking, continuing to negotiate, even though it will be difficult, and well, even in our case, some of these issues have been on the table since 1963.
Yeah.
They're not new issues, so I don't see these things being resolved easily. We should keep that in mind. It's going to be difficult, but the attitude and the orientation, I think that's what counts in the end. Okay.
All right. Yeah, the next question is interesting. Yeah. It's not.
Yeah.
I think this is an interesting question. Is it still relevant today for Sarawak and Sabah to continue to be part of Malaysia together with Semenanjung? What is it in for Sarawak, Sabah, and Semenanjung to be together? So this is an interesting. I believe many have that in mind. Yeah. Maybe it's quite simply by Lim Sawu. Is it still relevant? So.
Yeah, Sarawak, in terms of its size, is almost as big.
As big, yes.
Peninsular Malaysia.
Yeah.
And it has got resources, population that is spread out.
Spread out.
Yeah. But the argument one would make for the Federation to continue, that together I think we'd be able to help each other more if we are together within the same family. Semenanjung will benefit from this relationship in terms of resources and all the rest of it. And I think if we are genuine, Sabah and Sarawak will benefit from whatever expertise we have and, whatever help we can offer those states as part of one's common membership of the Federation. One must always bear in mind that if one is on one's own, given the environment that we're in, our surroundings, will it encourage certain other forces
Come in.
to, yes, and what would be the consequences of that? To keep that in mind, because we've been together, for quite a few decades. But if the Federation breaks up, Sabah and Sarawak, on their own, and given the contiguous, borders with Kalimantan and the rest of it, and don't forget that Indonesia is shifting its capital to Kalimantan.
Mhm.
We may want to take into account all these factors.
Yeah. China, US.
Perhaps, yes. Sabah is, in a sense, the center of Southeast Asia in physical terms, It's the center of Southeast Asia. This is why when the late Tunku Aziz proposed ASEAN University, he thought it should be in Sabah because it's right there in the center of the region. I think there are good reasons to stay together. Problems that confront us, and this would be another reason why we should stay together. I don't think they're insurmountable. I don't think the problems are insurmountable compared to what other federations have had to face, challenges that they face. I don't think, these are challenges that cannot be overcome. And one of the reasons why there's more talk about why don't we go on our own and so on today than before, it's because, as in other countries, the middle class has expanded in Sabah and Sarawak. And once the middle class expands, it is not unusual for them to make demands like this. We want a bigger say, more important role, and all the rest of it. But there's no reason why Malaysia as a whole cannot provide greater mobility to people from those states through both economic development and also, I suppose, through the new technologies and so on, we'll be able to enhance mobility.
A good third question. Good third question.
Yeah.
Thank you, Chandra. This is again almost the same question. This is probably more of a legal or maybe practical. Is it possible for Sabah and Sarawak to secede from Malaysia, and why? These are questions, and these are the talks that's happening at the ground level. Maybe a small group of people, as you had mentioned correctly, probably among the middle class, more so among the middle class rather than the general public as a whole.
well, if the vast majority of people in a particular country or in a particular state want to secede, and the will is strong, the determination is there, I suppose one would be able to succeed, as it's happened in other instances in history, you know. But if it is something which emerges as a result of inter-party politics and the sort of fractionalization that's taking place in society, getting fractured, you know, I don't think it's healthy. Sorry?
No, I think there's a voice from someone. So.
Yeah. No, I don't think that would be healthy. It's because of fractions in society, because of, you know, elite ambitions, certain elites who want to go their way because they want a position of importance, you know. So they want to see, till today, the question of whether the setting up of Pakistan was the product of the development of certain social forces in Pakistan because of religious factors, because of the Hindu majority, and all those factors are often cited, or just elite ambition. It's something that has not been resolved. You know? Yeah. It's very difficult to say how these things happen and, you know, why they happen and so on. But I would like to believe that different communities can live together, that they can, no sort of, more than just coexist, you know, that they would be able to share a common destiny, that be able to build a nation together. And I think that is, to my mind, very important. Yeah, it's a very big challenge. It's true. But I do not think one should yield easily to this idea of breaking up, you know, separate states or the rest of it, you know, if we can avoid it. Of course, there are some situations where you cannot remain together anymore, you know, because things are really bad. I don't know in the case of the breakup of Pakistan, whether it was a product of some such circumstance. Again, you find there's a lot of writings that argue the case from different angles. You know, yeah. But yeah, in the case of our own example, Malaysia and Singapore, I don't know whether we could have remained together. Some people say it was the easy way out, that the Tunku, you know, because the Tunku as a person didn't want to see any bloodshed. He thought there would be trouble, there would be riots and so on. He thought the best way was to allow for separation. And that he thought would also sort of meet the aspirations of Lee Kuan Yew, because he wanted to become prime minister in the real sense, not just in name, because he was already a prime minister in name. Yeah. But I don't know, you know, whether that is true, but yeah, these are imponderables, very difficult to provide answers to things like this.
Thank you, Chandra. I'll go for the next question, yeah?
Yeah.
Now, this is, again, you know, the topic is always about center and state powers and integration. Talking about integration of the three regions of Malaysia, Sabah, Sarawak, and Malaya, how integrated are we now? What more is needed? I think we have spoken about how integrated. Maybe what more is needed by Amdi Siddiq? What else should we do? Yeah.
Well, as a general proposition, I would argue that we should decentralize in certain areas, but there should be a more positive attitude towards decentralization. More powers at the local level, for instance, yeah, in terms of managing their own economy, when people think of ways and means of doing it, developing local level industries, providing a certain degree of financial autonomy to localities, districts, regions. I don't know whether the idea of the corridor, East Coast corridor and Northern corridor, whether those ideas were meant to move Malaysia in the direction, but we haven't seen much movement in the direction. We remain quite centralized, actually. And I think the COVID crisis showed how that sort of centralization can sometimes be a problem. I think vaccination would have been much faster earlier if we were more decentralized. Yeah? And if we had all the structures in place. So decentralization, I think there is a case for it. Also for strengthening, sort of economies at the base. Decentralize, strengthen the economies at the base sometimes. It's something that we should pursue. What we can do in Malaysia, and maybe in terms of apart from financial base for that sort of decentralization, I think it's also important to make localities feel that they have an identity of their own. When I look at some of the earlier writings, I think there was much more enthusiastic commitment to local history and, building up local materials of that sort, which I think is necessary. When you become too centralized or when everything is done from one central point, you find that it's lost.
Thank you, General. Next question is long, a bit. But I thought I will just read through. And this, I feel that like questioning about why is Sabah and Sarawak wanting to become like tiga negara instead of seeing themselves as one of the 13 states. I think that's how I would summarize this particular comment here. I think I'll start. It also points to the fact that individual states in Peninsular Malaysia are not recognized to be of equal footing with Sabah or Sarawak. I'm not sure as to how we could integrate without forcing either one to submit to a single one-sided notion of a nation state through the use of political power. I think maybe the speaker could provide his analysis on this matter in the talk, both academically or even politically by Chok Pek Fen. I think this is the opposite. Say, why must Sabah Sarawak have that special, as compared to the other 11 states?
Special partly because of history. We talked about earlier, it would not have been possible for them to come in on other terms. They had to preserve their identity, their history, and all the rest of it. And whether it is unfair, I suppose federations are always confronted with this challenge because of the peculiarities of time and circumstance. You have to take that into account, so that they will remain within the federation. I think one of the reasons why the Hawaiians have continued to remain in spite of the fact that it was a raw deal for them. They fought long and hard for their independence. But one of the reasons why they have remained, I think, is because they can articulate their grievances, they can organize, they can mobilize, and do things of that sort. Because if you provide people with that space, you'll find that eventually they will remain with you. It's when you suppress people completely that they react and decide to break away and so on. I think India discovered that also when regional assertions were taking place in the 50s. The initial reaction on the part of the Indian elite was, to insist on control. That after a while they realized it doesn't work. When you recognize the rights of the Sikhs, of those who have a certain notion of Punjabi identity, and people have a certain notion of Tamil identity. Like in the case of those who are part of the Tamil Nadu movement, You recognize those things, eventually you find that they remain part of the union or the federation. And one has to, I think, recognize the desire of people to retain their identity. Canada would be another example. If you look at the initial responses to the Quebec movement, and then the changes that took place later, the desire to accommodate. You can't go beyond a certain point, I agree. You can't try to accommodate to such an extent that eventually there is no sort of meaningful interaction.
Yeah.
And all the rest of it. Yeah. Nonetheless, I think a certain degree of accommodation would be very useful.
Yeah, I'll go to the next question. Thanks, Chandra. I'll go to the next question. It's a very open question. What are the first three most important moves to get Sabah and Sarawak on equal par with the peninsula? So we need to decide what is equal par here. Could Dr. Chandra elaborate on three factors that hinders people in peninsula from living peacefully just like Sabah and Sarawakians? I think here, as we did mention just now, that Sarawak is probably a role model for the rest of us in terms of interracial, interreligious harmony. Is this a cause of development or race-based politics? Daniel, Alexander, I think it's a very wide question, Chandra, so you can elaborate. Be good.
Well, I think first we have to clarify what we mean by race-based politics. I find that we use this term quite loosely, race-based politics. In any society with ethnic affiliations, with certain history, there will be politics based upon ethnicity. And I'm not surprised that that has happened in our case. And in a number of other cases. It's not a question of whether the party calls itself an ethnic party or not, What is important, I think, is the content. The content. Yeah, you can have a party which claims to be multi-ethnic and yet be ethnic-based. In terms of its membership, in terms of its policies, in terms of its struggle, and so on. So what is important, I think, is to move away from the type of politics which glorifies ethnicity or religion, for that matter. In other words, superiority, sort of, complex that develops as a result of the type of thinking. I think that's the sort of thing we do. But ethnicity as something that one is concerned about and one takes positions, those things will always be there in multi-ethnic societies. And I don't see it as a problem. It is whether we can aggregate those demands, whether we can incorporate them into the larger political system, large economy, and I think if we can do that, it would be quite okay. It's not a problem. Yeah. What I find very interesting, Anas, about people who talk about this race-based thing is some of those who are against this are actually people who are active in race-based politics.
Yeah.
What they mean is actually
The other side has to change.
That's right. That's right. It's always like that. They don't look at their own, side.
Yeah. All right. I think I'll take one or two. Do you mind, Dr. Question already in the chat. Is there an effort taken by the Ministry of Education to promote integration of Sabah Sarawak Semenanjung through the school curriculum, for instance, through the study trips made to Sabah, Sarawak, and vice versa?
Study trips, I don't know. I'm not aware whether this is being done or not. It's very expensive. Yeah. But in terms of the syllabus, the content, 20 years compared to the period before that, yes. It is very easy. And maybe young people are more knowledgeable about those states and so on, though I still think that a lot more can be done. Maybe we should make use of modern technologies to promote this through the classroom, through other activities and so on. More extensive use of modern technology to bring, for instance, the tremendous richness, flora and fauna of Sabah to the rest of the nation. I don't think many Malaysians know how rich, the flora and fauna of this particular state is. It's the community, the Encyclopedia of Iban Studies, 4 volumes recently, and I am really fascinated by some of the things in terms of Iban history. I'm not aware of those things. I wasn't. Certain aspects which people here in this country, and vice versa.
I think we take one more and then we can wrap it up. Again, this is the politics of Semenanjung, especially the race-religious sentiment recently expressed, especially the idea ketuhanan Melayu, Zaya, I guess you put here for secession. Is it possible for this factor to be reversed? Maybe this is the issue of ketuhanan Melayu being used as a political tool.
Confusion, about the term itself.
Right. Yes.
This is one term which segments of the 2 different communities, the Malays and the non-Malays, they mean different things by the term itself. And we get into this unfortunate situation where there's misunderstanding and there's a great deal of negative thinking about what this means, mainly because we really don't know its meaning. I don't want to attempt to go into the nitty-gritty of this issue and us this time, at the end of our session. But some of us have written about this in times, and that Ketuhanan Melayu, it is interpreted as dominant, majoritarian attitude, wanting to control, dominate, and so on. If that's your interpretation, and it's wrong to suggest that it's the only interpretation. There are people who have interpreted the Ketuhanan as host. The idea of Tuan, that sort of thing. They don't see it in a negative sense. There was some communication at the level of cultural specialists and language specialists so that we can throw some light on this whole thing. And if you use this term in the future, there would at least be some understanding of what it really means and why it is generating this sort of
the great meaning
reaction. Understand why people react in a certain way to the term, because the term by itself, taken out of context without understanding what it has meant at different times in history and so on, it can be problematic. And if one can explain political and social reality in some other way, like, if one can explain the Malay position without using this term, but how the Malay position had developed and why, there is this sentiment about the Malay position and so on, which, to put it in a nutshell, which had emerged partly because the Malays, to be more specific, the Malay elite, decided to share the land. Because they decided to share the land, this notion of, Malay position became much more pronounced. So we'll have to find a way of getting both communities to understand each other, and in such a way that one knows, well, this is what it means. It's not an attempt to disenfranchise anyone. It's not an attempt to diminish the status of anyone. At the same time, it is not an attempt to glorify a particular community at the expense of others. Yeah. But sometimes, it's difficult to explain things like this in Malaysia because a term very often becomes controversial very quickly. And then you want to try to restore a certain degree of rationality. It becomes very difficult.
Yeah. And also people tend to switch off, once you,
Yeah, true, the switch off. Yeah, you're right.
Well, Dr. Chandra, we are already planning to see how have a talk about this topic in the future. That would be good.
Yeah.
But I think it's we already taken more of your time. Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra. Again, the explanation, the easy to understand way of explaining a very vast topic. I truly appreciate it, and I believe also all of us here really appreciate to be able to absorb such a big topic within a short period of time. Thank you so much, Dr. Chandra.
Yeah, it's a pleasure.
And I will pass back to the floor to Dr. Anin. Dr. Anin.
Yeah, thank you so much, Anas, for moderating the session. Now, wouldn't you agree that histories and geographies often make for complicated relationships? Sometimes they walk together and sometimes they They have to imagine new ways of walking and staying together. And and geography and history are therefore central to the understanding of our world, and places are natural laboratories for study of complex relationships between peoples, cultures, even borders. Dr. Chandra, your talk brought to mind this nuanced relationship that many post-colonial countries are grappling with. You know, establishing unity in the post-colonial world, and in the context of national and multicultural narratives makes for a very interesting area of research by social scientists. Thank you, Doctor, so much, Dr. Chandra, for sharing. Every session with you is filled with new knowledge and bring forth so many questions to our minds, and we'll be looking forward to our next session with you. Many thanks to Anas for very deftly and eloquently hosting today's session, moderating today's session as usual. Thank you, Anas. We look forward to invite Dr. Chandra back for another session in about a month from now to share about yet another chapter about the story of Malaysia. And ladies and gentlemen, our next MPPI talk will be held on 19th of August at 8 p.m., which is a fortnight from now. And we look forward to welcome Prof. Shad Salim Faruqi back for yet another insightful talk. So please do follow our Facebook page, Taylor's Bachelor of Social Science, as well as Anas Zubedy's Facebook page for timely intimations of our forthcoming webinars. So to join us on Thursday, 2 weeks from today at 8 p.m. again. Till then, stay safe, stay healthy, and a very good night from all of us.
Thank you. And everybody, let's give Dr. Chandra a big hand and say thank you.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.